The silence and the solitude of Alaska are passing. The last American frontier is closing with a storm of change and with a struggle of conflicting ideals for the future of Alaska. North to the future is Alaska's motto. To some, Alaska is the last great wilderness and must be protected. To others, it is the last great frontier bonanza to exploit. Somewhere between these 2 points of view rests the character of the Alaskan future. Alaska exists on a scale barely within grasp of the imagination. It is twice as big as Texas and 9 times as large as New England. It has rivers of glacial ice, one as large as the state of Rhode Island. The coastline of Alaska is longer than the Pacific, Gulf, and Atlantic coasts of the lower 48 states combined. Of all the lakes in the country, fully 1/2 are in Alaska. Most of the highest mountains on the North American continent are also here. Mysterious monarchs decreeing their own weather. A man exploring 1,000 acres of Alaska each day would need 1,000 years to complete his work. We bought Alaska from Russia in 1867 for a few pennies an acre. Even at that price, many Americans called the purchase folly. But critics who complained of the bitter cold and said this land was worthless had no idea of Alaska's hidden wealth or of her infinite moods. For all the brightness of spring, the untamed vitality of the land finds its highest expression during the brief but intense Arctic summer. Sometime between the ice ages, perhaps 40,000 years ago, early hunters and fishermen crossed the Bering Sea and the ancient land bridge from Asia. Successive waves of Indian, Aleut, and Eskimo peoples spread a tough membrane of human life across the immensity of Alaska. The Aleuts called it Alakshak, the Great Land. Life was never easy. It often dangled on the luck of the hunt. These scattered peoples used the land and the sea knowingly and lived for 1,000 generations in a flesh and blood intimacy with nature. The centuries of peaceful evolution by the Alaska natives came to an end barely more than 200 years ago. During the 18th century, Russian trappers and traders clambered across the sea to Alaska's western and southern coasts. They harassed the gentle sea otter almost to extinction and ravaged the populations of other fur-bearing animals. Their century in Alaska is recalled now by names and places, a few buildings and a few grave markers. The white man's history in Alaska, Russian and American, has been marked by cycles of boom and bust. The fur trade, whaling, and gold had their day. At Kennecott, in south-central Alaska, a fortune in copper was taken out between 1880 and 1939. All that remains today are abandoned buildings, reminders of the fleeting substance of mineral wealth. Today, as yesterday, most of Alaska's wealth comes directly from the land and water. The Alaskan fishery is prized for its salmon, halibut, and king crab. But in recent years, pressures on the fishery have begun to diminish even this renewable resource. The native subsistence fisherman once counted on the abundance of salmon. Now he too must scramble for his share of an uncertain catch. Gold and platinum are mined commercially by a few men and machines gouging at stream beds. Some make a living, but the gold rush is history. billions of barrels of oil under the Arctic slope ignited a new frenzy of expectation. "800 miles from Valdez in the south to Prudhoe Bay in the north, the spirit of the old boomer lives along the pipeline. Alaska received nearly $1 billion from oil leases at Prudhoe Bay. Additional leases and royalties were expected to pay for a prosperous future, new roads, new schools, new hospitals, and a new state capital. But these hopes turned out to be premature, for it had not been decided who owned Alaska. With admission to the Union, Congress granted the state the right to select more than 100 million acres for the people of Alaska. But the selection of land for state ownership soon involved the Alaskan natives' historic hunting and fishing grounds. Increasing contact with outsiders had altered native life. Health and educational services concentrated these once nomadic peoples into villages, where the lifestyle was more modern, but not always better. Now, even the tough Alaskan sled dog is largely obsolete and unemployed. When it seemed likely the final subdivision of Alaska would leave the natives with less for the future than they had in the past, they united in proclaiming their ancestral land rights. And this time, the nation listened. The issue was resolved in 1971 with passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Under this law, the natives received 40 million acres of land and a cash payment of nearly $1 billion. The Native Claims Act also recognized the rights of all Americans in Alaska. It directed the study of some 80 million acres of federal lands for possible addition to the 4 systems of national land management and protection. About 32 million acres were suggested for new national parklands, additions that would more than double the size of our national park system. Nearly 19 million acres of new national forests would be created, an important addition to this system of federal lands. More than 31 million acres of new wildlife refuges had been proposed, again, more than doubling the scale of this system nationally. 20 Alaskan rivers have been recommended for addition to our national system of wild and scenic rivers. These proposals, together with already existing parklands, forests, and refuges, honored the claims upon Alaska of all our citizens. This is our assurance that wild Alaska will not disappear in a few generations. The national system of wild and scenic rivers in Alaska offer kayaker and canoeist some of the world's most challenging waters. Among these rivers are many that test a man's appetite for daring. The National Park System will perpetuate some of the most inspiring parts of Alaska's scenic, recreational, and cultural heritage. The grand sweep of Alaskan architecture, volcanic mountains, crater lakes, ice fields, and even sand dunes above the Arctic Circle will be protected for visitor use and enjoyment, as well as for scientific study. The parklands embrace a unique record of mountain building and glacial erosion that sculpted the landscapes of half the world. The parks also safeguard the artistic and archaeological treasures of long-lasting human cultures. More than 100 million acres of interior Alaska are forested. Lands proposed as new national forests contain major timber and other values. The forest system is charged with conservation of renewable resources, forage, water, wildlife, recreation, and wilderness, as well as timber. The forests are also potential sources of minerals, oil, and gas. They provide an outdoor laboratory for wildland research, cooperative forestry, and youth conservation corps programs. Under the concept of multiple use and sustained yield, utilization of these resources could be carried out in harmony with the northern environment, including Alaska's people. The National Wildlife Refuge System will help ensure thriving populations of wild creatures that deepen man's reverence for life. The men and women entrusted with public land management are committed to long-term goals. In a world closing in on wildlife and wilderness, theirs is the task of maintaining vital habitat. Without this work or this land, the autumn skies would be less alive with migrating birds. The birds of 6 continents fly thousands of miles to nest or to feed in Alaska. Several species nest no other place in the world. Alaska is the summer home of more than 12 million ducks, 1 million geese, and nearly 400 million other birds. This land is big, but size, in some ways, is an illusion here. A third of the state is above or beyond the tree line. Half is fragile tundra. Life is stretched across yawning space. Large numbers of animals survive only because their range is vast. If the great herds of caribou were to linger, they would quickly destroy their source of food. Each Arctic grizzly must have 100 square miles of his own turf. The future of life in such tenuous balance with its environment requires the dedication of large land and water areas. This is still possible in Alaska. All life is interdependent, and the food chains of animals, birds, and fish often rest upon the protection of complete ecosystems. In Alaska, this too is practical. The four systems encompass much of the gentle, easy, accessible Alaska, areas that attract the most intensive public use. Alaska is both an invitation and a challenge to the adventuring spirit. Some Alaskan regions have never felt the weight of a human foot. Most of the lakes are nameless. Some of the rivers have never been floated. The four systems of parklands, forests, wildlife, refuges, and national wild and scenic rivers would guarantee a taste of wilderness for all who cherish it. We have in Alaska a chance to avoid some of the missed opportunities of the American past. To respect the rights, cultures, and lifestyles of the native peoples. To develop vital Alaskan resources with environmental caution. And to manage a portion of the great land in public trust for the benefit of all Americans. Along with state, native, and other land ownerships, the four systems offer a solid land use foundation for Alaska's future. When Yellowstone National Park was established 100 years ago, it was so distant that many felt it would never be used. Congress had created a land reserve for the future, one that now supports millions of visitors each year. In Alaska, we are offered the opportunity today to preserve the parks, refuges, rivers, and forests for tomorrow. We shall never again have a wilderness frontier quite like Alaska. We shall never again have such an opportunity to protect and manage it wisely. We shall never again have such a gift to make to the future.